Well, here we are. We have reached the last workday of the Easter season. So here it is, Friday of the 7th week of Easter. Always keep in mind that Lent is 6 weeks long. Easter is 7, and the reason is because we are Easter people more than we are Lenten people. Always keep that in mind, and I might discuss that more in the second half of the program. We really don't have much of a reading, which is kind of interesting in light of the fact that I said yesterday it doesn't take a lot to please the Lord, and the reading we have is almost a transitional reading. Basically, what it does is it's a reading that's there. We talked about how some of the readings are transitional readings, and they set us up for what is ultimately the final reading of the Easter season, which is Paul being sent to Rome and established in Rome. He's in Rome. He's there for 2 years. And he's basically, as a citizen, allowed to preach the message, to welcome people. He was probably under something similar as we see in the reading. It looks like something similar to house arrest, but he can accept people coming by, and he can talk to them, and he can tell them about the word and everything else. So we can focus on those two readings. But what we have here is basically the story of King Agrippa and Bernice, who have decided that that Festus refers the case to the king, and the king ultimately says, well, why don't we send him to Rome, which is what Paul wanted. And, of course, that's what the Lord wanted. And then, of course, we get into the reading for Saturday. But that's the transition. Today is the one that sets up for Saturday, where we see Paul. He is there. Now, he's there for 2 years, and then finally he has his trial, and he is executed. And there's a fascinating element to it. I've talked about this before, but why not talk about it again? And that's when I was in Rome, on my way to Rome. I've only been in Rome once, and that's the only time I have been east of Cape Cod. I've been south of Cape Cod, all the way far down to Sao Paulo, Brazil. And in case you didn't know, the northern border of Sao Paulo, Brazil, the northern border of Sao Paulo, Brazil is the Tropic of Capricorn. That's where it's located. So actually, when you're in Sao Paulo, you are outside of the tropics in a sense, because the tropics are between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, and you are literally on the line anytime you're in Sao Paulo, south of the Tropic of Capricorn. However, obviously, it's like Florida, Key West, the Caribbean, and all that. So the weather, and it's wonderful weather down there. But in any case, we see this that's the one time that I have been to Rome, and someone said, look for the prison where St. Paul and St. Peter were. And it's really, you can look for it. It's not in a very obvious place. In a sense, it is, because it overlooks the Forum, but it's behind literally this huge rock. And you go around the rock, and there it is. And it's not a very big prison at all. It's probably, it kind of reminds me of when I was at the Naval Training, the Naval Training Center. The smallest building was Naval Intelligence. So I said, well, that says a lot. But it was actually about the size of the Naval Intelligence Building at Naval Training Center, which tells you nothing unless you've been there. But it wasn't that big. It wasn't that big at all. And I was surprised. And this prison overlooked the Forum. Well, again, I know I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. You have to realize, kind of think of it this way, the prison overlooking the mall in Washington, D.C. And in a sense, you've got all these wonderful buildings. You've got the mall there. You've got the Capitol building, got the White House, the whole bit. And you'd see this prison overlooking this, and it would see the great power, political power of the United States, just as looking at the Forum would be the great political and cultural and even spiritual power of the Roman Empire. But when you're there, you see the prison, which is still there, but the Forum is in ruins. And the Forum was lost for centuries. And yeah, the Forum is in ruins. And you got to realize when Peter and Paul are looking at the Forum, everyone is saying this is the great majesty in Rome, the eternal majesty of Rome. And Peter and Paul are saying to each other, this is not an eternal majesty, because this will go the way of all empires. And of course, we know ultimately it did. And so you're looking at these ruins and you can just imagine that whole scene taking place. And this is what's being set up in this scene. And remember what I said yesterday, just the tiniest things. So Paul is there for 2 years. He's welcoming people. I'm sure Peter he ultimately meets up with Peter. So the two of them meet up. Maybe they both are on house arrest or something, but in any case, they're executed pretty much together. Paul has his head chopped off. Sorry if you're eating. And Peter is crucified upside down. And that's what happens to the two of them. But there's something to think of, because Paul is preaching the word, and now we see this. Paul's life is completely turned around by his encounter with Christ. He's never the same again, and this is the powerful thing that we're called to understand about that encounter with Christ. It completely changed him to the point that he testifies to everything that he taught by giving his life for it. There's a fascinating story by can't remember his name, Charles Colson. And he writes, Charles Colson was chief of staff under Richard Nixon. So when Watergate happened, he was one of the Watergate criminals, by the way, and he spent time in prison. That's how he set up his own prison ministry to continue bringing the gospel into the prisons, because he had from his own experience. So that was Charles Colson. But he writes this fascinating story of the fact that he was one of the most powerful men in the world. He worked for Richard Nixon, who was the leader of the free world. He says people would come to his office, and he would call them to his office maybe to fire them, and they'd be in tears. He could pick up the phone and he could have, Air Force One waiting on the tarmac. He had this tremendous political power. And yet when Watergate happened, the whole cover-up lasted 3 weeks. He says, here I was. The whole thing lasted 3 weeks, and they all ended up doing time in prison. And he says he knows for a fact Jesus resurrected from the dead. And the reason is not just because of the testimony he reads in the Bible and everything else. It's from his own experience. He was one of the most powerful men in the world, and the Watergate cover-up lasted 3 weeks. He says he knows, in fact, there is no questions asked that if Jesus did not resurrect from the dead, then there is no way the apostles, who weren't really super powerful men, could have maintained because it would ultimately be a lie, maintain this lie in the face of the power of the Roman Empire, unless it was absolutely true. They would have caved. Someone would have caved. He said there would be a deathbed confession, maybe by Peter or whatever. And there's a fascinating similar story about that from our modern times, not at all related to Charles Colson, but related in a sense to the same kind of dynamic in a sense. And that was the story of Miguel Pro, Jesuit priest Miguel Pro. And what had happened was that the Mexican government, which was communist at the time, or well on its way to communism, you do know that was going to be the second communist country, and the Soviet Union's first embassy was in Mexico City. So, and of course, the emperor there, I forget his name, Maximiliano, that's right. And so what happened was an atheist society, and they believed that Father Miguel Pro, would basically cave at the thought that he was going to die. And he would admit that all of this was a scam. So they invited photographers from all over the world to come and watch his, or at least all over the country, to come and photograph his execution, because they believed at the last moment he would beg for his life. Well, instead, what he did is, as they were getting ready with the firing squad, and he was standing before the firing squad, and he knelt down and prayed first, and then he stood up, he spread out his arms like a crucifixion and said, "Viva Cristo Rey," which means "Long live Christ the King," which was such a powerful testimony to what he believed. So he didn't cave, just as Charles Colson said the apostles, people would expect the apostles to cave. They didn't cave because this was the truth. And Miguel Pro understood this was the truth, and he just said those simple words, Viva Cristo Rey, and he was shot, and all these pictures demonstrate that now the Mexican government is trying to hide those pictures, and of course they couldn't, and now they're on the internet. This powerful story testifying, just as Paul did, just as Miguel Pro did, Christ lives. We'll be right back right after this. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer, previews of upcoming podcasts, previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com, your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. So we were talking about this powerful, again, very simple act that Paul does, where he's just basically living in Rome for 2 years, inviting people to come by, telling them all about his encounter with Jesus, telling them all about his life and the whole thing, and then ultimately he is executed. We know that story. But one of the things I wanted to bring out, that's something that's been on my mind for a little while, to kind of look at that. First of all, I love the books, especially the Rational Bible series by Dennis Prager, and I really appreciate his commentary on the Torah. And he's got one more book to do, which is the book of Leviticus. Unfortunately, you may or may not know that I believe it was a year ago, November, he fell while taking a shower and ended up paralyzed from the neck down. And he taught about happiness. So he learned how to be happy in this situation. Don't ask me how I could ever do that. But anyway, he's a very tall man, and the way he fell caused this injury that left him paralyzed from the neck down. It's a tragic story. And he still hasn't finished, or he could still be working on it, and probably is, the book on Numbers. That's the last of his Torah, his book on the Torah. Well, he brought out something fascinating in Numbers in the Rational Bible series. And this is something to think through. Miracles do not build people's faith. And I know I've had that experience where teaching people about the faith, teaching people about Christ and everything else, and, and also working with people who want to build up the parish. And this is actually in another parish when I was actually the parish is closed now, in Chelsea. It was a different parish. And it was a parish that we ended up taking over and for a while. And then I ended up being transferred. But several years later, that parish was closed. And the powerful the powerful reality of this sitting down, and they're having this meeting, and they're discussing of ways to build up the parish. And they thought of bringing a famous healing priest who has since died, a healing priest, to do miracles. Well, again, I don't mind that, but there's something about it that does bother me, because it becomes like a show. And people are looking for the fireworks. You can see that also with these people who follow around these celebrity exorcists. They want to see the fireworks, but that doesn't build their faith. Miracles do not build their faith. It's believing and acting on your belief without miracles, in fact. Miracles are important, but remember, miracles are there to draw in the believers, to the non-believers. That's what they're there for. And they may be there to strengthen the believers, but that's it. Miracles are not there to be seen all the time so you can see God is with it. And the context that Dennis Prager brings this in is the doubt of the Jewish people, despite all the miracles they saw God doing to lead them out of Egypt, but they still, throughout the time until they reached the promised land. And the section I was reading was the section where the spies come back and say these people are basically unconquerable and the whole bit. And these spies basically try to end this journey. Maybe they all wanted to go back to Egypt. I don't know. And the people lose faith in God. And Dennis Prager puts out, they've seen all these miraculous things happen, but they still lost faith in God, because miracles do not basically are not the basis of your faith. It really is to believe and to act on your beliefs. So that's important. So that's one of the things we got to understand. But we also have to realize that part of that belief is to allow ourselves to be led by the Holy Spirit. So that's an important aspect. And one of the things that I've come to think of, and it's something I actually have come to believe, that anyone who can name you all the rules and all the laws and can tell you and start telling people who should and shouldn't receive communion, and can tell people if certain people receive communion unless they go to confession, and this is scandal, and this is sacrilege, and kind of citing all those laws without taking into the action of the Holy Spirit, well, even mentioning prayer to these people and talking about prayer or anything else. I believe that they don't believe. I believe that they think they believe, but I believe anyone who's sitting there naming rules, and especially anyone, and some of these online influencers who are stating false information about the Pope, I don't believe they believe in God. Well, I shouldn't say that. I believe they believe in God, but the God they believe in, as Dennis Prager would point out, is not the actual God that we believe in. They think they do, but they don't, because their whole understanding is on rules and regulations, and they have no concept of the movement of the Spirit. And what is the Spirit saying, and how are we guided by the Spirit, which is the whole point of Pentecost. I've been thinking about this as maybe the theme of my homily for this weekend. And I'm actually getting to think that these people who are stating all these rules and can turn around and say to someone, and this actually, it comes from a comment from someone on YouTube who is Catholic, and he has what the Catholic world calls same-sex attraction, and he says this is a reality, and he follows what the church teaches on this, but he has people saying that he should not receive communion. This is a sacrilege, which it isn't. It's scandal and all the other stuff, and which it isn't, because if he, in fact, is living the faith, and they're giving all these reasons why he should not receive communions for the sole fact that he has same-sex attraction, which is not Catholic teaching. It is not a sin to have that. That is Catholic teaching, that it is not a sin to have that. And people are condemning him and saying he shouldn't receive communion, this is scandal if you do, and all this other stuff. And I'm looking at this saying, these people don't believe in God, because my whole response, and when people have talked to me about one issue or another, including same-sex attraction or whatever, I always talk to them about prayer. And prayer is essential. I do it all the time. If you're not praying, in my sense, if you're not praying, you're wasting your time. You're following rules and everything. You're not really, because you don't really know God. And you got to think of St. Paul is experiencing this powerful reality of talking to people of his encounter with God and his daily encounters with God, which are not miraculous. They're just the reality of knowing God is with him and everything else. And you've got people who have no concept of that, none, and just know the rules and have no concept of an encounter with Christ, and will tell people you have to follow the rules, otherwise you're going to end up in hell, and most people are going to hell. That's what they're saying, and they're not working hard enough. I absolutely have come to believe these people do not believe, at least in the God that we believe in. I have no idea what God they believe in, but I have to say that. And when I look at that, and people might be a little thrown off, you have to understand that. Do you actually believe in the God that the church teaches, this merciful God who loves us so much that he sent his only begotten Son, it sacrificed him so that we may be saved? And this is so powerful, so real. He came to teach us. He sent his Holy Spirit to guide us. And yet you'll have people who throw all of that away, name several rules, condemn people, call them sacrilegious, even though they are living church teaching, but they're not living church teaching the way these people want. You got people there who are telling people that the vast majority of people are going to hell and talking about hell all the time. You've got people out there who are preaching, even priests, preaching this whole exorcism stuff, that the exorcist, that the devil is so powerful and everything. The devil is not powerful. The saints used to say that. The devil has no power. He only has as much power as you give to him. And all that power is taken away when you go to confession. That power that the devil has, you go to confession, that's so powerful. And what they teach, and I have to start to say, do they actually believe in God, or at least the God that we believe in, that the church teaches? And my personal opinion is absolutely not. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Snakes, zombies, sharks, heights, speaking in public. The list of fears is endless. But while you're clutching your blanket in the dark, wondering if the sound in the hall was actually a footstep, the real danger is in your hand when you're behind the wheel. And while you might think a great white shark is scary, what's really terrifying and even deadly is distracted driving. Eyes forward. Don't drive distracted. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. Well, this coming weekend is Pentecost Sunday. It'll be a great celebration. Bishop Henning, for those in the Boston area, will be the celebrant of Mass at, I believe it's St. Elizabeth Stein Parish. It's one of the tri-parishes of Brockton. You can call there to find out more. You can just look up on your favorite search engine, Brockton Catholic or Catholic Brockton, and it'll come up and you can ask them. But that's coming up this weekend. I believe it's St. Elizabeth Stein Parish. St. Elizabeth Stein. No, St. Edith Stein Parish. I'm sorry. I keep doing that. St. Edith Stein Parish in Brockton, and he's going to be celebrating Mass there for Pentecost Sunday. And, of course, your own parishes you can go to as well. We'll be back on Monday. Have a blessed day.
Yeah, you know the real is back. Father Carr Chaplain from the city of champions, dropping daily reflections coming straight from the field. The raw truth revealed for the strong-willed. It's the Greatest Act of Defiance podcast with your host Father Carr, a message built to last. The Greatest Act of Defiance podcast. That's right, the Greatest Act of Defiance. Word up. Word up. Word up.
The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.